The clock on the hospital wall showed 11:47 p.m. when Lisa Rodriguez heard the screech of tires followed by a terrible crash that made her heart skip a beat. She had been working the night shift at Central Valley Medical Center for almost 9 years now, and she knew that sound meant trouble. Lisa was just finishing up her medication rounds on the 3rd floor when the noise echoed through the building. At first, she thought maybe it was just another ambulance arriving, but something felt different about this sound. It was too sharp, too violent to be a normal emergency vehicle arrival. She quickly walked to the nearest window and looked down at the street below. What she saw made her stomach drop. A silver car had crashed into a light pole right outside the hospital parking area. Steam was rising from the crumpled hood, and she could see a person lying on the ground next to the driver's side door. Without thinking twice, Lisa dropped her clipboard and ran toward the elevator. Her mind was racing as she pressed the button, repeatedly, willing it to come faster. She had been a registered nurse for over a decade, and every instinct in her body was telling her that someone down there needed help immediately. The elevator seemed to take forever, so she decided to take the stairs instead. Her white nursing shoes echoed in the stairwell as she rushed down 3 flights as fast as she could. Her heart was pounding, not from the running, but from knowing that every second could mean the difference between life and death for whoever was lying on that cold pavement. When she finally burst through the hospital's main entrance, she could see the situation was even worse than it had looked from the window. The car was completely destroyed on the driver's side, and a man who appeared to be in his 50s was lying unconscious about 10 feet away from the vehicle. He must have been thrown from the car during the impact. Lisa ran to his side and immediately began checking his vital signs. His pulse was weak but present, and she could see that he was breathing, though very shallowly. Blood was trickling from a cut on his forehead, and his left arm was bent at an unnatural angle. She could tell right away that he had suffered serious injuries. "Sir, can you hear me?" She called out while gently checking his neck for any obvious spinal injuries. There was no response. His eyes were closed and his skin was becoming pale and clammy. These were not good signs. Lisa looked around quickly to see if anyone else was nearby who could help, but the street was surprisingly empty for a Friday night. She realized she was completely on her own until the paramedics arrived. Someone must have already called for help because she could hear sirens in the distance, but they still sounded far away. The man's breathing suddenly became even more labored, and Lisa noticed his lips were starting to turn blue. Her nursing training kicked in completely as she realized he was going into respiratory distress. She had to act fast. She tilted his head back slightly to open his airway, being very careful not to move his neck too much in case there were spinal injuries. Then she began rescue breathing, giving him slow, steady breaths while monitoring his pulse. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 2 minutes, his color began to improve slightly, but then his pulse started getting weaker. Lisa felt for it at his wrist, then at his neck. It was becoming irregular and faint. She knew she was losing him. "Come on, stay with me," she whispered as she positioned her hands on his chest and began CPR compressions. She had performed CPR many times in the hospital, but never outside on a cold street with no equipment and no backup. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. She fell into the rhythm that had been drilled into her during countless training sessions. Her arms were already getting tired, but she couldn't stop. This man's life was literally in her hands. The sirens were getting closer now, but she couldn't wait for help to arrive. She continued the CPR, counting out loud to keep herself focused. 1, 2, 3, 4. Her voice was getting hoarse, and sweat was starting to drip down her face despite the cool night air. After what seemed like forever, she suddenly felt a pulse return. It was weak, but it was there. The man's chest began rising and falling on its own again, and some color returned to his face. Lisa almost cried with relief. Just then, the paramedics arrived with their ambulance lights flashing. They quickly took over the scene, but Lisa stayed nearby to give them a report on what she had done and what condition she had found the man in. The paramedics worked efficiently, stabilizing him and getting him ready for transport. "You did great work here," one of the paramedics told her as they loaded the unconscious man into the ambulance. "He's lucky you were here. A few more minutes and we probably would have lost him." Lisa nodded, feeling a mix of exhaustion and satisfaction. She had done what any nurse would do in that situation. She had seen someone who needed help and she had helped them. It was that simple. As the ambulance pulled away with its lights and sirens blaring, Lisa suddenly remembered where she was supposed to be. She looked at her watch and realized she had been away from her floor for almost 20 minutes. Her heart sank as she thought about her patients upstairs who were probably wondering where their nurse had gone. She hurried back into the hospital and took the elevator up to the 3rd floor. As soon as the doors opened, she could see her supervisor, Mrs. Patterson, standing at the nurse's station with her arms crossed and a very unhappy expression on her face. "Where have you been?" Mrs. Patterson demanded. "I've been looking for you everywhere. Mrs. Johnson in room 314 has been calling for her pain medication for 15 minutes, and Mr. Williams needed help getting to the bathroom 20 minutes. Oh. Lisa took a deep breath and tried to explain. There was a car accident right outside. A man was seriously injured and unconscious. I had to help him. I performed CPR and probably saved his life. Mrs. Patterson's expression didn't soften at all. "That's not your job, Lisa. Your job is to take care of the patients on this floor. What happens outside this hospital is not your responsibility." "But he would have died if I hadn't helped him," Lisa protested. "I'm a nurse. I took an oath to help people who are sick and injured." "You took an oath to follow hospital policies," Mrs. Patterson replied sternly. "And hospital policy clearly states that you cannot leave your assigned area without permission from a supervisor. This is a serious violation, and there will be consequences." Lisa felt like she had been punched in the stomach. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. She had just saved someone's life, and instead of being thanked, she was being reprimanded. The unfairness of it all was overwhelming. As she walked back to her patients trying to push down the anger and hurt she was feeling, Lisa had no idea that this was just the beginning of a situation that would change everything. She didn't know that the man she had saved would turn out to be someone very important, or that her act of compassion would eventually lead to consequences no one could have predicted. All she knew was that she had done the right thing, and somehow, that had gotten her into trouble. But even knowing what she knew now, she wouldn't have done anything differently. Sometimes doing the right thing is the only choice you have, no matter what the cost might be. 3 days passed after the accident, and Lisa tried her best to put the whole situation behind her. She continued her regular shifts, taking care of her patients and doing her job just like she had for the past 9 years. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something was brewing behind the scenes. Her co-workers had been incredibly supportive. Several nurses on her floor had heard about what happened that Friday night, and they all agreed that she had done exactly what any good nurse would do. Janet from the emergency department even stopped by to tell her that the paramedics had been talking about how her quick action had definitely saved the man's life. "You should be getting a medal, not a write-up," Janet said while they were having coffee during their break. "I can't believe Patterson is making such a big deal about this." Lisa appreciated the support, but she could see the worry in her colleagues' eyes. Everyone knew that Mrs. Patterson didn't let things go easily. When she felt someone had violated hospital policy, she made sure there were consequences, and lately the hospital administration had been getting stricter about everything. On Monday morning, Lisa was just starting her shift when she got a message that made her stomach drop. One of the administrative assistants approached her at the nurse's station with a serious expression. "Mrs. Patterson wants to see you in her office at 2 p.m. today," the assistant said quietly. "She asked me to tell you to bring your employee handbook with you." Lisa's heart sank. She knew this wasn't going to be just another conversation. When supervisors asked you to bring your employee handbook, it usually meant they were preparing to quote specific policies at you. This was going to be formal. The next few hours dragged by slowly. Lisa tried to focus on her patients, but her mind kept wandering to what might happen in that meeting. She had been written up once before, about 4 years ago, for being late to work during a snowstorm. But this felt different. This felt more serious. At exactly 2 p.m., Lisa knocked on Mrs. Patterson's office door, She could hear voices inside, which surprised her. She had expected this to be a private conversation. "Come in," Mrs. Patterson called out. When Lisa opened the door, she saw that Mrs. Patterson wasn't alone. Mr. Reynolds, the hospital's head administrator, was sitting in a chair next to the desk. This was definitely not a good sign. In her 9 years at the hospital, Lisa had only spoken to Mr. Reynolds maybe 3 or 4 times, and never in a disciplinary situation. "Please sit down, Lisa," Mrs. Patterson said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. Her tone was cold and formal, completely different from their usual interactions. Lisa sat down and placed her employee handbook on her lap, her hands trembling slightly. She tried to appear calm, but inside, her heart was racing. "We need to discuss what happened Friday night," Mr. Reynolds began. "We've reviewed the incident report that Mrs. Patterson filed, and we've also looked at your employment record. I understand you're concerned about me leaving my floor," Lisa said, trying to keep her voice steady. "But there was a man dying outside. I couldn't just ignore that." Mrs. Patterson opened the employee handbook that was sitting on her desk and turned to a page that was already marked with a yellow sticky note. Section 4.2 of the employee handbook clearly states that nursing staff are not permitted to leave their assigned areas during their shifts without prior authorization from a supervisor or in response to a hospital-wide emergency alert. "But this was an emergency," Lisa protested. "Someone needed medical help." "An emergency outside the hospital premises," Mr. Reynolds corrected. "Our policies exist for a reason, Lisa. We have specific protocols for situations like this. You should have called security, who would have contacted the paramedics. You should not have abandoned your post." Lisa felt like she was in some kind of nightmare. She was being lectured about protocols while a man's life had been hanging in the balance. "So you're saying I should have just watched him die while I waited for someone else to help him?" "We're saying you should have followed proper procedures," Mrs. Patterson replied firmly. "While you were outside playing hero, Mrs. Johnson was in severe pain waiting for her medication. Mr. Williams fell trying to get to the bathroom by himself because his nurse wasn't available. You put our patients at risk. Mrs. Johnson got her medication 15 minutes late and Mr. Williams had a minor slip with no injuries," Lisa said, her voice getting stronger. "But the man outside would have died if I hadn't helped him." "How? Is that even comparable?" Mr. Reynolds leaned forward in his chair. "Lisa, I understand your intentions were good, but we can't have nurses making individual decisions about when to break hospital policy. What if every nurse decided to leave their floor whenever they thought there was an emergency somewhere else? What kind of chaos would that create?" "This wasn't just any emergency," Lisa said desperately. "This was literally life or death. I'm a trained medical professional. I couldn't have lived with myself if I had just stood there and watched someone die." Mrs. Patterson closed the employee handbook with a sharp snap. "Your feelings about the situation don't change the facts. You violated clearly stated hospital policy. You abandoned your assigned duties, and you did so without any attempt to get authorization or follow proper channels." "There wasn't time for proper channels," Lisa said, her voice breaking slightly. "He was unconscious and barely breathing. Every second counted." "That's exactly the kind of thinking that leads to chaos," Mr. Reynolds said. "We have to maintain discipline and order. We can't have employees making their own rules based on what they think is right in the moment." Lisa looked back and forth between the two administrators, and she could see in their faces that their minds were already made up. This wasn't really a discussion. This was just them going through the motions before delivering whatever punishment they had already decided on. "What's going to happen to me?" she asked quietly. Mrs. Patterson and Mr. Reynolds exchanged a look. Then Mr. Reynolds spoke up. "After careful consideration of your violation of hospital policy and taking into account the potential risk you created for our patients, we've decided that termination is the appropriate response." The words hit Lisa like a physical blow. "Termination? You're firing me for saving someone's life?" "We're terminating your employment for violating hospital policy and abandoning your duties," Mrs. Patterson corrected. "Your employment with Central Valley Medical Center is ended immediately. You'll need to turn in your badge and clear out your locker today." Lisa sat in stunned silence for a moment. 9 years of dedicated service. 9 years of taking care of patients, working extra shifts when needed, always being reliable and professional, and it was all ending because she had saved a stranger's life. "I can't believe this," she whispered. "I literally saved a man's life and you're firing me for it." "You're being terminated for policy violation," Mr. Reynolds repeated. "We'll provide you with information about Cobra Health Insurance continuation and your final paycheck. Security will escort you while you collect your personal belongings." As Lisa walked out of that office, she felt like she was in a daze. Word traveled fast in the hospital, and by the time she reached her floor to clean out her locker, several of her co-workers had already heard the news. Some of them were crying, others were angry. "This is absolutely ridiculous," Janet said, her voice shaking with rage. "I'm going to file a complaint, we all are. This is completely wrong." But Lisa knew it wouldn't matter. The decision had been made, and there was no going back. As she packed her personal items into a cardboard box, she wondered if she would ever work as a nurse again. Would other hospitals even hire her after being fired for policy violation? What Lisa didn't know was that this was far from over. The man whose life she had saved was about to wake up and ask some very important questions. And when he learned what had happened to the nurse who saved him, everything was going to change in ways that nobody could have predicted. Lisa's story didn't end when she walked out of Central Valley Medical Center with her belongings in a cardboard box. In fact, it was just beginning to get interesting in ways nobody could have imagined. The news of her firing spread quickly through the hospital, and it didn't take long before some of the nurses started talking to people outside of work. Janet, who worked in the emergency department, happened to mention the story to her neighbor who worked for the local newspaper. She was so angry about what happened to Lisa that she couldn't keep it to herself. "You won't believe what happened at the hospital," Janet told her neighbor over the fence while they were both working in their gardens. "They fired one of our best nurses for saving a man's life. Can you believe that?" Her neighbor, Mike Torres, was a reporter who had been looking for a good human interest story. When he heard about Lisa's situation, his journalist instincts kicked in immediately. This sounded like exactly the kind of story that people needed to hear about. Mike contacted Lisa the next day and asked if she would be willing to talk about what happened. At first, Lisa was hesitant. She didn't want to cause more trouble or burn any bridges in case she needed references for future jobs. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that what happened to her was wrong, and maybe telling her story could prevent it from happening to someone else. The article came out in the Sunday paper with the headline, "Nurse Fired for Saving Life Outside Hospital." It told Lisa's story in detail, explaining how she had performed CPR on a stranger and saved his life, only to be fired 3 days later for leaving her assigned area without permission. The story caught fire immediately. People in the community were outraged. Social media posts about Lisa's situation started spreading, and local radio stations picked up the story. By Monday morning, Central Valley Medical Center was getting phone calls from angry citizens who couldn't believe a nurse had been fired for helping someone. But the real breakthrough came when Mike Torres decided to dig deeper into the story. He was curious about the man Lisa had saved. The police report from the accident was public record, but it only listed him as John Doe because he had been unconscious when the paramedics arrived and had no identification on him at the time. Mike went to the scene of the accident and talked to people in the area. He found a security guard from a nearby office building who had seen the whole thing happen. The guard remembered that the car had expensive-looking license plates and seemed like it might belong to someone important. "I remember thinking it was a really nice car," the security guard told Mike. "One of those luxury sedans that cost more than most people make in a year. Whoever was driving it had money." This got Mike even more curious. He contacted the police department and asked if they could tell him more about the accident victim. The officer he spoke with couldn't give him personal information, but he did mention something interesting. "The guy was really grateful when he woke up," the officer said. "He kept asking about the nurse who helped him, said he wanted to thank her personally. Seemed like a real stand-up guy." Mike realized he needed to find this mystery man. He had a feeling there was more to this story than just a nurse getting fired unfairly. He started checking hospital records, but They wouldn't give him any information about patients. He tried calling different departments, but everyone was very careful about privacy rules. Finally, Mike had an idea. He went back to the scene of the accident and looked around more carefully. He noticed there was a high-end restaurant just 2 blocks away. Maybe the man had been coming from there that night. It was a long shot, but Mike was running out of options. He went to the restaurant and talked to the manager, explaining that he was trying to find someone who might have been there the Friday night of the accident. The manager was helpful but couldn't give out information about customers. However, he did mention that they had security cameras that might have caught something. After getting permission from the restaurant owner, Mike was able to look at the security footage from that Friday night. Around 11:30 p.m., he saw a well-dressed man in his 50s leaving the restaurant and getting into a silver luxury car. The timestamp showed this was just about 15 minutes before the accident happened. The man in the video looked familiar to Mike, but he couldn't quite place where he had seen him before. He took a screenshot of the image and started showing it around to people in the community. Finally, someone at the coffee shop near the newspaper office recognized him. "That's Dr. Chen," the coffee shop owner said immediately. "He comes in here sometimes, really nice guy. He's some kind of heart doctor, I think. Does a lot of charity work around town." Mike's heart started racing. Dr. William Chen was one of the most respected doctors in the entire region. He was the head of cardiology at University Medical Center, which was about 30 miles away. But more importantly, Dr. Chen was known throughout the area for his generous donations to hospitals and medical charities. He had been featured in the newspaper several times for his philanthropic work. Mike quickly did some research and discovered that Dr. Chen had donated millions of dollars to various medical facilities over the years. He was particularly interested in supporting emergency medicine and trauma care, probably because of his background in cardiology, where quick response times could mean the difference between life and death. But the most shocking discovery came when Mike called University Medical Center to ask about Dr. Chen. The hospital's public relations department told him that Dr. Chen had been in the hospital for several days the previous week, recovering from injuries sustained in a car accident. They wouldn't give details about his condition, but they did confirm that he was doing well and had been released. When Mike called Dr. Chen's office to request an interview, he was surprised by how quickly the doctor agreed to meet with him. They arranged to meet at a quiet coffee shop downtown the next morning. Dr. Chen arrived right on time, walking with a slight limp and wearing a cast on his left arm. Despite his injuries, he seemed energetic and genuinely interested in talking about what had happened that night. "I remember everything up until the moment I hit that pole," Dr. Chen told Mike. "The next thing I knew, I was waking up in the hospital 3 days later. But the paramedics told me that a nurse from the hospital had saved my life. They said if she hadn't started CPR immediately, I probably wouldn't have made it." Mike felt his pulse quicken. This was the confirmation he had been hoping for. "Dr. Chen, did you know that the nurse who saved your life was fired from her job for helping you?" The color drained from Dr. Chen's face. "What did you just say?" Mike explained the whole situation to Dr. Chen, telling him about Lisa's termination and the hospital's reasoning. As he spoke, Dr. Chen's expression grew more and more serious. "This is unbelievable," Dr. Chen said quietly. "This woman saved my life, and they fired her for it. What kind of place fires someone for helping another human being?" "It gets worse," Mike continued. "The hospital administration said she violated policy by leaving her assigned area. They made it sound like she was being irresponsible." Dr. Chen was quiet for a long moment, and Mike could see that he was thinking hard about something. Finally, the doctor looked up with a determined expression on his face. "I need to tell you something," Dr. Chen said. "I was actually on my way to Central Valley Medical Center that night. I had been planning to make a surprise visit to discuss a major donation I was considering. We're talking about $50 million for a new cardiac wing." Mike nearly choked on his coffee. This story just kept getting bigger and bigger. But after hearing what they did to the nurse who saved my life, Dr. Chen continued, "I can tell you right now that they'll never see a penny of that money. In fact, I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of people are running that hospital." As Mike sat there listening to Dr. Chen, He realized that Lisa's story was about to take a turn that nobody at Central Valley Medical Center could have seen coming. The nurse they had fired for saving a stranger had actually saved the one person whose support they needed most. And now, that person was about to make sure everyone knew exactly what they had done. When Dr. Chen left that coffee shop meeting with reporter Mike Torres, he was a man on a mission. The respected cardiologist had always believed in doing the right thing, and what he had just learned about Lisa's firing made his blood boil with anger. The first thing Dr. Chen did was call his lawyer. He wanted to make sure that when he went public with his story, he did it in a way that would have maximum impact. His lawyer suggested they write a formal letter that could be sent to both the hospital administration and the local media at the same time. That evening, Dr. Chen sat in his home office and carefully crafted a letter that would change everything. He wrote about the night of the accident, about waking up in the hospital and learning that a brave nurse had saved his life. Then he wrote about his shock and disgust when he learned that this same nurse had been fired for her act of heroism. But the most important part of the letter was what came next. Dr. Chen wrote about his planned $50 million donation to Central Valley Medical Center. He explained that he had been considering this donation for months, and that he had actually been on his way to the hospital that night to discuss the details with their administration. However, the letter continued. After learning about the unconscionable treatment of Nurse Lisa Rodriguez, I am hereby withdrawing my offer of donation. I cannot and will not support an institution that punishes compassion and rewards bureaucratic cruelty. My donation will be redirected to a hospital that truly understands the values of medical care. Dr. Chen had his lawyer send copies of this letter to Mr. Reynolds, Mrs. Patterson, and the entire board of directors at Central Valley Medical Center. At the same time, copies went to Mike Torres at the newspaper, 3 local television stations, and 2 radio stations. The letter hit Central Valley Medical Center like a bomb going off. Mr. Reynolds was in his office Wednesday morning when his secretary rushed in with a panicked expression on her face. "Sir, you need to read this immediately," she said, handing him the letter from Dr. Chen. As Mr. Reynolds read the letter, his face went from confused to shocked to absolutely terrified. $50 million. The nurse they had fired had saved the life of a man who was about to give them $50 million. And now that man was taking his money elsewhere. Mr. Reynolds immediately called an emergency meeting with Mrs. Patterson and the hospital's board of directors. When they all gathered in the conference room an hour later, the atmosphere was tense and desperate. "Do we have any idea how serious this Dr. Chen is about this donation?" asked board member Janet Walsh. "I mean, $50 million? Are we sure he actually has that kind of money?" Mr. Reynolds had already done his research. "He's completely serious. Dr. Chen has donated over $100 million to various medical facilities over the past 10 years. His foundation has more money than some small countries. And now we've made an enemy out of him." Mrs. Patterson, who had been unusually quiet during the meeting, finally spoke up. "We followed proper protocol. The nurse violated clearly stated policy. We can't be expected to make exceptions just because someone turns out to be important." $50 million, Patterson, Mr. Reynolds shouted, his composure finally cracking. "Do you understand what $50 million could do for this hospital? We could have built a world-class cardiac center. We could have attracted the best doctors in the country, and you threw it all away because you couldn't make an exception for someone who saved a man's life." But the bad news was just getting started. By that afternoon, Dr. Chen's letter had been published in the newspaper and broadcast on every local news station. The story was spreading beyond the local community, too. Regional news networks picked it up, and it started trending. On social media, the hospital's phones were ringing constantly with angry callers. People were canceling appointments and procedures. Several doctors who had privileges at the hospital started expressing concerns about the administration's decision-making. Dr. Martinez, who ran the hospital's emergency department, came to Mr. Reynolds' office that afternoon with his own bombshell. "I just got off the phone with 3 other major donors," he said grimly. "The Thompson Foundation is reconsidering their $2 million pledge for new equipment. The Miller Family Trust is talking about pulling their annual support, and the Regional Healthcare Initiative is saying they might redirect their grant money to other hospitals." Mr. Reynolds felt like he was watching his career crumble in real time. How much are we talking about in total? If all of these donors follow through on their threats, we're looking at losing over $75 million in funding, Dr. Martinez replied. And that's just what I know about so far. There could be more. The situation got worse when the hospital's own staff started expressing their displeasure. Several nurses submitted formal letters of complaint about Lisa's firing. 2 doctors threatened to resign if the hospital didn't change its policies. The nursing union started talking about organizing protests. By Thursday, the hospital was in full crisis mode. Mr. Reynolds was getting pressure from the board of directors to fix the situation somehow. The hospital's public relations department was working overtime trying to manage the media fallout, but it wasn't working. Every statement they issued just seemed to make people angrier. Mrs. Patterson, meanwhile, was starting to realize that her rigid enforcement of hospital policy was about to cost her job. She had been so focused on following the rules that she hadn't considered the bigger picture of what those rules were supposed to accomplish. On Friday morning, exactly 1 week after Lisa had been fired, Mrs. Patterson made a desperate phone call. She had managed to get Lisa's phone number from her personnel file, and she called her at home. "Lisa, this is Mrs. Patterson from Central Valley Medical Center," she said when Lisa answered the phone. "I think we need to talk." Lisa was surprised to hear from her former supervisor. "What about?" "I think there might have been a misunderstanding about your termination," Mrs. Patterson said carefully. "We'd like to offer you your job back, with a raise and a promotion to senior nurse status." Lisa couldn't believe what she was hearing. A week ago, this woman had been lecturing her about following policies. Now she was offering her a promotion. "What changed?" Lisa asked. Mrs. Patterson was quiet for a moment. She couldn't bring herself to admit the real reason for the call. "We've reconsidered our position on your actions that night," she said finally. "We realized that you showed excellent judgment and medical skills." But Lisa had been following the news. She knew exactly what had changed. Dr. Chen's story had been all over the local media, and she had seen the reports about the withdrawn donation and the other funding that the hospital was losing. "I appreciate the offer," Lisa said calmly, "but I'm not interested in coming back." Mrs. Patterson's voice became more desperate. "Lisa, please reconsider. We really need you here. The hospital values nurses like you." "The hospital fired me for saving someone's life," Lisa replied. "If you really valued nurses like me, that never would have happened in the first place." After Lisa hung up the phone, Mrs. Patterson sat in her office staring at the wall. She knew she had lost more than just a good nurse. She had lost the respect of her staff, the confidence of the administration, and quite possibly her own job. What Mrs. Patterson didn't know was that Lisa had already received a much better offer from University Medical Center, where Dr. Chen had put in a personal recommendation for her. And Dr. Chen was just getting started, with his plans to make sure Lisa's story had a happy ending, while Central Valley Medical Center faced the consequences of their terrible decision. 6 months after Lisa Rodriguez walked out of Central Valley Medical Center with her belongings in a cardboard box, the world looked completely different for everyone involved in her story. Lisa was thriving in her new position at University Medical Center, where Dr. Chen had personally recommended her for a senior nursing position in their emergency department. Not only was she making significantly more money than she had at her old job, but she was also working in a place where her skills and compassion were truly valued. "I love coming to work here," Lisa told her friend Janet during one of their regular coffee meetings. "The administration actually supports us when we make difficult decisions. They trust our judgment as medical professionals." Janet, who still worked at Central Valley Medical Center, shook her head sadly. "I wish I could say the same about our place. Things have gotten really bad since you left." The situation at Central Valley Medical Center had continued to deteriorate after Lisa's departure. The loss of Dr. Chen's $50 million donation was just the beginning of their problems. Within 2 months, they had lost over $80 million in promised funding from various donors and grants. The Thompson Foundation had pulled their $2 million equipment donation after learning about Lisa's firing. The Miller Family Trust had redirected their annual support to other hospitals. The Regional Healthcare Initiative had moved their grant money to University Medical Center instead. Each lost donation was another nail in the coffin, but the financial losses were only part of the problem. The hospital was also facing a serious staffing crisis. After Lisa's story became widely known, many of the best nurses started looking for jobs elsewhere. They didn't want to work for an administration that would punish them for doing the right thing. Dr. Martinez had been the first to leave. The emergency department director had resigned in protest just 3 weeks after Lisa was fired. "I can't work for people who fire nurses for saving lives," he had told Mr. Reynolds during his exit interview. "This place has lost its moral compass." 2 other senior doctors had followed Dr. Martinez out the door. Several experienced nurses had taken positions at competing hospitals. The nursing union had organized 2 protests outside the hospital, drawing even more negative attention to the situation. Mrs. Patterson had tried desperately to hold things together, but her authority had been completely undermined. The nursing staff no longer respected her leadership, and the administration was looking for someone to blame for the crisis. 3 months after Lisa's firing, Mrs. Patterson was quietly asked to resign. Mr. Reynolds lasted a bit longer, but the hospital's board of directors eventually decided that new leadership was needed. He was replaced by a new administrator who had been brought in specifically to try to repair the hospital's damaged reputation. The new administrator's first official act was to reach out to Lisa and publicly apologize for her treatment. He also announced new policies that would protect healthcare workers who provided emergency medical assistance, even when it meant leaving their assigned duties. But the apology and policy changes came too late to save Central Valley Medical Center's cardiac program. Without the funding they had lost, they couldn't afford to maintain their heart surgery unit. The cardiac wing was forced to close, and all of those patients had to be transferred to other hospitals in the region. Many of those patients ended up at University Medical Center, which had used Dr. Chen's donation to create one of the most advanced cardiac care centers in the entire state. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The very patients that Central Valley Medical Center could no longer treat were now being cared for by the hospital that had hired the nurse they had fired. Dr. Chen had kept his promise to redirect his donation, but he had done much more than that. He had also convinced several of his wealthy friends and colleagues to support University Medical Center's new emergency response program. The total funding had grown to over $60 million. The centerpiece of the new program was the Lisa Rodriguez Emergency Response Center, named in honor of the nurse whose quick thinking had saved Dr. Chen's life. The center featured state-of-the-art equipment and training facilities designed to prepare healthcare workers for any kind of emergency situation. "I wanted to make sure that Lisa's story became a symbol of what healthcare should be," Dr. Chen explained during the center's grand opening ceremony. "Healthcare workers should be celebrated for their compassion and quick thinking, not punished for it." Lisa was the guest of honor at the opening ceremony, but she was almost too emotional to speak when they introduced her. "I never expected any of this when I ran outside to help a stranger that night," she said to the crowd. "I just did what any nurse would do, but I'm grateful that something positive has come from such a difficult experience." The Lisa Rodriguez Emergency Response Center quickly became a model for other hospitals around the country. Medical schools started using Lisa's story as a case study in ethical decision-making. Nursing programs added her experience to their curriculum as an example of the importance of putting patient care above bureaucratic rules. Dr. Chen and Lisa had developed a close friendship over the months following the incident. He had become something of a mentor to her, encouraging her to pursue additional certifications and leadership training. "You have a gift for emergency medicine," he told her. "I think you could help train the next generation of nurses." Lisa took his advice and enrolled in a master's degree program for nursing education. Her goal was to eventually become a nursing instructor, where she could teach young nurses about the importance of making good decisions under pressure. Meanwhile, Central Valley Medical Center was struggling to rebuild its reputation and financial stability. The new administration was working hard to restore community trust, but it was a slow and difficult process. They had learned the hard way that good employees are more valuable than strict policy enforcement. The hospital's new mission statement specifically mentioned the importance of supporting healthcare workers who show compassion and initiative. They created an employee recognition program that celebrated staff members who went above and beyond their normal duties to help patients or community members. But for many people in the community, the damage was already done. Central Valley Medical Center had shown their true priorities when they chose bureaucracy over human compassion, and that wasn't something people would forget easily. Lisa's story had also caught the attention of national media outlets. She was interviewed on several television programs and featured in medical journals. Her experience had sparked important conversations about hospital policies and the need to support healthcare workers who make difficult ethical decisions. I hope my story helps other nurses feel confident about doing the right thing, even when it's difficult, Lisa said during one of her interviews. We became healthcare workers to help people. Sometimes that means making tough choices, but we shouldn't be afraid to follow our hearts and our training. A year after the incident, Lisa received a letter that brought tears to her eyes. It was from a nursing student who had heard her story and been inspired to continue her education despite facing her own challenges. Your courage reminds me why I wanted to become a nurse in the first place, the student wrote. Thank you for showing us that doing the right thing is always worth it, even when it's hard. As Lisa read that letter, she realized that her story had become bigger than just her own experience. It had become a reminder that healthcare is ultimately about human compassion, and that the people who dedicate their lives to helping others deserve to be supported and celebrated, not punished for caring too much. The stranger she had saved that night had indeed become a lifelong friend, and together they had turned a story of injustice into a story of hope and positive change that would inspire healthcare workers for years to come.